Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon, the show where I take a look at each episode of classic Doctor Who, plus a bunch of Big Finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 24th of August, 2019, I am taking a look at the final script by Douglas Adams, the infamous Shada. Unlike previous episodes of this series, this episode is one of currently 3 planned scripted reviews. This is mainly because Shada, like the Five Doctors in the TV movie, are single-part, full-length Doctor Who stories instead of being split into bite-sized serials. So instead of rambling, this video should be a bit more structured and just get a bit more. Now, Shada is one of those stories that, while often praised as the mysterious lost adventure, going in has had several releases before the release that this video is actually covering. Of course, if you don't know, the story was intended to be the 6-part finale of the 17th season of Doctor Who, but was cancelled by industrial action. Incumbent producer John Nathan Turner attempted to revive it, first oddly enough as a feature-length Christmas special for 1980, then a 4-part serial for the 1980-81 season, and finally as a potential story for Colin Baker's run of the Doctor in 1985. All these attempts obviously failed, and the first quote-unquote proper release of the story was actually the 1992 VHS release, which took completed footage, assembled as much of it as it could, had the composer of stories like Time in the Ronnie Dalton the Bannerman and Remembrance of the Daleks, Kev McCulloch, create this 1980 synth score, and brought Tom Baker in to read narration to fill in the gaps and just put it out on VHS. That release was actually one of the 2 releases I was intending to cover, but other releases include a fan novelization in the mid-1990s, the Flash animated 6-episode webcast starring Paul McGann and Lala Ward and John Leeson, and produced by James Goss and I think Big Finish Productions for the 40th anniversary, the expanded Big Finish CD release of the 2003 of the said webcast, and a 2012-2013 novelization for Sign Up for the 50th anniversary by Gareth Roberts. Finally, in 2017, after the success of the animated Power of the Daleks, which we actually did cover, Tom Baker, Lala Ward, and the surviving cast members were brought together to actually finish the story in sort of a 2-hour and 15-minute film version. And this is the film version we are actually going to be looking at today. So without further ado, let's get started on the 2017, sort of a briefer look at the 2017 release of Shada. So the first thing that really jumps out at you when watching this release of Shada isn't the animation or the acting, but the music. Mark Ayres supplied the score and sound design for this release. He did, outside of this release, he worked mainly in the McCoy era, and basically has worked on remastering a lot of the music for the DVD releases. He did the music for Greatest Show in the Galaxy, Ghostlight, and The Curse of Fenric, which are 3 great stories in Sylvester McCoy's tenure as the Doctor. Now, he did this release in a style completely in keeping with season 17, and with that, it's an immediate improvement over the 1992 release. Kevin McCulloch attempted to homage the works of legendary Doctor composer Dudley Simpson in that release, but his score was far too similar to a lot of the scores for the stories of the late 1980s, with these occasional motif references to Simpson's work. Mark Ayres' Shada score is by far a more fitting tribute to the late Simpson, with plenty of references to the scores like the scores of City of Death and Pyramids of Mars, and there are probably plenty of others just from the period that I am completely missing. Another plus is that Mark Ayres really knows exactly when to put in a music cue and just when to let the action of the story speak for itself. Whereas Kev McCulloch in the 1992 just inserted all the cues into almost every reaction. Like in part 1, I watched part 1 recently, and it was like every few minutes there was another cue. It was another big sting, like da da, things like that. And they just really would take you out of the experience overall. Really, they don't it doesn't do quite that good a job. Um, but also something important is that the sound mixing done by Ayers in this release was no doubt was there was no doubt that it was a complex job as well. Obviously, in taking Shada, they went to the original film masters, and they obviously had to master like the raw audio and the raw footage from the 1979 sources, and then just the new recorded audio from the 2017 recordings. And just the differences in technology, how far technology has come, how a microphone, acting in front of a microphone is different to acting on camera. Considering I think the acting happened in tandem with the animation, so there wasn't as much to go on. It just makes it complex. And this really actually includes 3 audio tracks, a mono track, a stereo track, and a surround sound track. And they're each mastered perfectly, which really allows a lot of the audio to aid in these transitions from animation to live action and back again. It really, and it really helps that it also gives it there's this really nice consistency that Ayers puts that you can't really tell that, oh, this audio was recorded on the day and this audio was recorded recorded much later. They all come very nicely together. There's also just something really, really magical about watching and hearing the Tom Baker Doctor Who theme at the opening credits in surround sound after an old-fashioned continuity announcement from the great Doctor Who fan Toby Hadoke. That really helps elevate this release. The animated segments of Shada are essentially the hardest thing to sell while attempting to recreate the story. Now, there's a reason for this, and it's a bit complicated. Story-wise, only about half of the original production had been filmed before industrial action took its toll in the release, and this release uses a mix of that footage and then animation. That if the scene was filmed, they went for the live-action footage. And if it wasn't filmed, they had to go for animation, which sounds like the easy thing to do, and it doesn't seem like a problem until you realize that the other 2 animations done by this Charles Norton and his team, Charles Norton being the director of this specific Shada, were the 2016 animated Power of the Daleks and the 2019 animated Macra Terror. And both of those are stories without surviving episodes. Thing is, and I've talked about it with on this marathon back in when I was doing some with the first 2 Doctors, is that animating stories with the already existing episodes can be jarring because you skip from live action to animation when episodes switch. Sometimes you'll get some lucky, like the Ice Warriors, where or the Reign of Terror, where there are 2 episodes animation and the rest is live action. But it's just jarring when there's a switch, and you have some. There's a reason that for the upcoming 2020 animation, the Faceless Ones is including all 6 of its episodes in an animated format, instead of doing a bunch of episodes instead of doing, not doing episode 1 and 3 because they both exist. This specific release also takes a further risk by it abandons the 6 episode serial format of all the other Shadow releases and the original intended release, instead of going for the 2 hour and 15-minute film presentation. And even then, the animation style that they went with should be working against the production, as it's this incredibly cartoony art style, almost referencing the style of the Doctor Who magazine comics, kind of at the time, just a little bit. But this isn't surprising, as Doctor Who magazine's Martin Garrity, Adrian Salmon, and Mike Collins all have had high positions and important parts to play in this project. There's a lot of influence here from the Doctor Who magazine, and you can really tell. Somehow the love and care has really been taken to make this style work. Part of that might be down to that might be down to just sort of the original comedic style, that this is a Douglas Adams script after all, and in Douglas Adams style, there's crazy characters and outlandish costumes and crazy sets and a lot of fun stuff. It also might just be because instead of having to animate a missing episode, it's essentially creating a new animation from scratch. It doesn't have to try to recreate an era as much. It, um, but perhaps the most important part to make it succeed is that first transition from live action to animation, because we started with a pre-credit sequence, all with some new model work that's actually really, really good. Props to Matt Irvine, who helped with the model work, and I think Mike Tucker, who also did a bunch of model work on this new Shada. But and then you have the first 10 minutes or so after the titles, all live action, um, until the end of the famous punting scene where uh, we had to actually transition into the first animated segment, which is the most important transition. If this failed, you would lose a lot of what could have done well. Yet what the animators did is they did something really, really interesting and something that worked really well. They took the original director Pennant Roberts' shot from panning from the river to the sky, and fading while on the sky quickly to an animated sky that matched before panning down to the animated version of Chris on a bicycle. It also kind of helps that it's not necessarily the Doctor we see animated first. We get to see the other characters, then we see the Doctor. But this first transition really allows the audience to continue to suspend disbelief and really continue to enjoy the story as it unfolds. It also just helps a lot that the filmed bits and the animated bits are all on completely separate sets. Luckily, with what they finished, by this point, Doctor Who was filming on a set-by-set basis, and filming on a set-by-set basis makes it really, really easy to just get a good sense of what's going on. Except, I guess, there are a couple of rooms on Skagra's spaceship where there is a mix between actual sets and animation because some stuff wasn't filmed. There's also a slight uptick in the animation quality when compared to what was honestly a rush production for The Power of the Daleks. Because Power of the Daleks had several things that were matte, several things that were grainy. The black and white and color versions look completely different. And looking ahead at the recently released Macro Terror, it's not an accident. This is now this is more a standard quality. We've sort of standardized it. It's making it more fluid, and they're starting to work better as a team. You can sort of see the exercise in team building. More time also seems to have been taken with this and the other release, as there wasn't that tight deadline for Power, because the Power had this idea that we must meet the 50th anniversary of the Power of the Daleks to get it out. And I think they only had like 4 months to try to get, like 4 to 6 months to get that together. But this one they had a bit more time, and they also kind of only had half the material. The highlight of the anime segments is also just the returning original cast members bringing the script to life. Many audio stories from Big Finish, especially with Tom Baker and Lala Ward, they sound visibly altered, but a lot of care has been done, partially going back to Mark Ayers, I believe, had to do work on this. Makes the transitions less jarring, and really, you don't necessarily tell them aging up. It's something that, perhaps could have been differently and could have failed completely, but I don't think it did. Yet, while all these high production values are great, the story is paramount when it comes to Shada. So, how does Shada actually hold up? Well, incredibly well. It's the third and final story to be written by Douglas Adams, and Adams' absurdism just shines through. This is the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He's one of my personal favorite authors. There's a reason City of Death is great and Pirate Planet is great. He is one of those authors. Now, not every joke lands. The tea joke, the one lump or two, one lump please, sugar joke, just I think was repeated a little much. First time I got a chuckle, second time was okay, but then the third time I'm like, you're doing this again? Okay, but there's still some amazing one-liners, like, undergraduates, I expect. I had tried to have them banned. Excuse the muddled, creative disarray, and oh dear, we Gallifreyans never managed to come up with a satisfactory form of grammar to cover these situations. There are all these, they come quick, and they just hit you, and you realize the wit, just of the writing here. The cast is obviously having a delight playing what is largely a comedic script. With some actually rather dramatic and dark turns near the end. there's a reason where when the Horns of Diamond was commissioned, it wasn't meant to be the finale. They were hoping this script would be the one to really bring the audience back and give the audience a back to a good sense of, hey, this is a good story. This is what we have here, and it's a great story. Um, the plot the plot itself sees the Doctor and Romana answering a call from Professor Chronodist, who is this retired Time Lord residing at Cambridge University, while the villain is Skagra, and his metal sphere steals minds to control the universe. After being sort of imprisoned at a think tank, like Skagra's actual plan is fascinating. He wants to create sort of a universal mind, and he wants to find this Time Lord criminal called Sally Avon. Now we don't actually get a lot of backstory on who Skagra is. The idea is that he may be part of a race that may or may not have broken off from the Time Lords in Time Lord history. Because there's this point in the middle where you really get a sense that you kind of forget about. But you meet these other scientists who the Doctor then admires as they're trying to chase Skagra, because a lot of the middle section of the episode is this chase to try to get to Shada. The Shada is of the title being the long forgotten prison planet of the Time Lords, which was purged by the memory of the Time Lord criminal Sally Avon, who was a great influence on the Doctor and had incredible psychic powers, and it's just a fascinating character overall. He's a really interesting character. You have some of these great ideas. You have this amazing bike chase, using again a lot of the location footage. Is great. You have, the sets are great. You have, the animated sets. The animated sets look good, and the 2-hour film presentation really does Shada a lot of favors. In the original script, there were definitely some great moments of terror that work as cliffhangers. The episode 2 cliffhanger where the sphere attacks the Doctor, the episode 3 cliffhanger where the Doctor is going to be killed by the computer, the episode 4 or 5 cliffhanger where it's the Krog attacking, and the Krogs are actually really, really good. You actually really get to see them here. What's really nice is that, oddly enough, their design already kind of looks like a comic book animation coming to life. So when they go into the style, it actually works a lot better. But putting it in, but you really changing the format, you get those moments of terror, but you also sort of don't get the weaker cliffhangers, especially the part 1 cliffhanger, which was basically a dramatic monologue from Skagra on the ship. They're that he was going to attack the Doctor, which honestly isn't necessarily a bad cliffhanger. But as a part 1 cliffhanger, it is kind of weak. So it flows much better if that just ends the scene with a dramatic sting and we cut back to a different scene. Now I will say, not everything works perfectly. This is still 2 hours and 15 minutes long, taken from a script for a 6-part story, which generally have a tendency to drag. And there are points where it drags, like the chase in the middle is kind of draggy. There's a bunch of very enjoyable fluff, but still a bit of fluff, nevertheless. And Douglas Adams really includes a few really fun concepts. There's this invisible spaceship, again, which the Doctor convinces to be on his side. A disappearing room that turns out to be an old TARDIS that's has the computer parts hidden among the Professor's bric-a-brac. And a book that explodes an X-ray machine. That's the Worshipful and Ancient Law of Gallifrey. Now, if you're familiar with Adams' work and you watch this, there's some parallels that almost border on rip-offs between Shada and Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. It's not a mistake. After it was obvious that this project wasn't going to be completed ever, Adams decided to just reuse several of his ideas, not let them go to waste for that novel. So, it's what he did with Life, the Universe, and Everything. That was based off of a Doctor Who script originally, which eventually got the novel treatment, and that we won't be covering that one here. And the plot is kind of full to bursting with ideas, and some get dropped. The characters do go a long way to make make up for what the couple of shorthands in the plot. Still, there are plenty of twists and turns in the story. A brief for Shada, which with animation, really giving the story that better pace and getting us into the nice things. With a better pace than the 1992 release, which is really random and really annoying pop-up narrations from Tom Baker that were really vague. Like when I was rewatching this, I completely forgot the middle section of the story existed because just because of the 1992 release really didn't do it justice. It just sort of it glossed over some important plot points that are only told in animation here because that's the only thing that's available. Which it really allowed me and by extension the rest of the audience really to enjoy the plot of Shada. The standout characters here are really Professor Chronotis and Skagra. Chronotis is this old friend of the Doctor, and for the first hour of the runtime, he's Dennis Carey plays the role as this kindly old man, just offering tea and generally being nice to everyone. He lets Chris borrow some books. He's the character really that sets off the plot. The idea is that when he left Gallifrey, he took some books, including a book from the Panopticon Archive, which wasn't supposed to leave the planet. It was supposed to be dangerous. It's the worshipful and ancient law of Gallifrey, which was incredibly dangerous, and if it falls into the human hands, and it turns out it holds the secret of how to get to Shada hidden within it, which is actually very interestingly foreshadowed in a bit of animation that I don't know if it would have been in the original story, but it's like this nice little background animation that very much could have been in it, but I don't think it was. That is really clever. It's stuff with a clock. He probably loses it, and of course, it's this book that Skagra is looking for. Within an hour, Dennis Carey endears himself to the audience. He causes a lot of trouble for the Doctor and Romana. He even dies halfway through and gets brought back to life in a really clever resurrection type thing. But he's so much fun to watch, and he's so well-meaning that you forgive him. He also has some really good interactions with the character of Claire in the middle, sort of really kind of taking her under his wing and, treating her like an equal. There's also this point where he's in a nightcap that is just hilarious. He's a funny character. And you can really see what's going on. Where Christopher Neame Skagra, however, is just so over the top and campy that his villainy teeters between truly terrifying and incredibly funny. His costume is very 1970s and very camp. The really campness comes really early on. As around the halfway point, there's this tonal shift towards the dark as the stakes raise, and it helps. That sort of helps make Skagra's eventual defeat, mental breakdown, and final punishment come across as incredibly sincere and moving, and just kind of worth it like that. This is really is an ending for the character. It's better than it could have been. Christopher Neame also just gives these looks which are genuinely hilarious and are amazing. They're both he's just an amazing actor. Chris and Claire sort of round out the major supporting cast. As both characters really get to shine here in the animated segments, the 1992 version of Shadow really didn't feature much of their best moments. A lot of it, some of it, Chris got more than Claire a little bit, but still, a lot of it was just told through the narration, so you're kind of rushing through them, and with that release, you really don't feel like you get to know them as characters. You kind of feel like, oh, they're just sort of there. This is the only release where you really outside of the novel, that really understand why the Doctor randomly calls Chris Bristol. It's actually kind of explained and develops over time. Tom Baker and Lalla Ward are obviously having some of their best moments here. This is right in the middle of their period where they were in blissful love. Many of these moments were present in the 1992 version, especially the scene where they're punting down the cam, which was famously reused in the Five Doctors, and for the longest time was the only clip available from the story. But overall, there's still just, even all this years later, the Doctor and Romana still have great chemistry, even though we know, as an audience, they aren't actually recording together, because Tom Baker and Lalla Ward don't particularly like each other, and they really don't get along as people. Adams even includes some really minor characters. There's this motorist who gives Skagra a ride and then dies tragically. You have the computer who isn't taught to think. It's just taught to obey, and that ties into Skagra's eventual downfall. And this unnamed police officer at the very end who gets a great final line. There's also the character of Wilkins, who is this porter who knows the Doctor, and just sort of this no-nonsense kind of character who kind of goes crazy when he opens the door to the professor's rooms and only finds a blue haze, because the professor's rooms obviously is the TARDIS, is his TARDIS. Oddly enough, also the effects of this story are great. They're all essentially, they all had to be completed in 2017, obviously, but they have that sort of almost night retro look to them. That it's like that the production team went to a painstaking care to try to do something that would have been available to the original production team. And the characters, even if they get a couple lines, they're really, really memorable. Douglas Adams is an amazing character author, and that really does shine through when it comes to Shada. Overall, I think the real question is, was completing Shada with animation after the 1992 release, the Big Finish webcast, the audio version, several book versions, and just the fact that it's been used in other stories and other, Douglas Adams works, really worth it? Yeah, it is. Honestly, the animation here is incredibly smooth. There's this amazing step up in quality from the previous animations. Having Tom Baker back as the Doctor one more time and Lalla Ward back as Romana one more time, one is a joy for fans. It is incredibly enjoyable to see them, just them as characters, and it really puts it above the Big Finish version, because the Big Finish version, sadly, was Tom Baker didn't do Big Finish at the time, so they recast the Doctor and rewrote the script for Paul McGann, which, doesn't really work very well, because you have a story meant for a specific actor, and Paul McGann is great, but he's not Tom Baker. Also, this format really allows these couple of minor edits, like some scenes are taken, and moved around from the original script, but that really irons out some of the flaws. Yeah, there are still flaws in the original script and flaws here. There's this one particular alteration at the very end, which is really just a treat for fans. It's Tom Baker coming back in live action to close out the story with the final line and give one last smile to the fans, which really, he's back in costume. Yeah, he's old, but it doesn't really ruin it. This is one of those great things. This isn't really, a perfect story, but this particular release brings up some Shada just up a little bit, and really, if you're gonna get a release of Shada, if you haven't experienced Shada, I'd say this is the definitive release. This is, it's the most complete, and it's probably the most fun. Yeah, there are a couple of points because Dennis Carey sadly passed away, so he doesn't appear. Luckily, they had most of his stuff done already in the live action segment. There's just one minor segment that they had to alter a little bit. Same with David Brierley, but they just take all audio from him later. But overall, this is the definitive Shada. As a story and as a release, I'd highly recommend you picking it up. It's available on DVD. It's available on Blu-ray. I think you can actually get it digitally in some places for free. And overall, I'll give Shada a final score of 9 out of 10. It's not perfect. There are some minor flaws, but Douglas Adams' script is amazing. Tom Baker's great. Lalla Ward is great. The acting is great. Everything about this experience is great. If you haven't heard Shada, do it. Do yourself a favor and watch it. Watch it as a movie. It's great. You can do it in one sitting. Thank you everyone for watching this rather different episode of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I do ask you, I do want to hear from you with people, especially on a story by one of my just favorite authors in general. I also want to hear from you. Did you like this scripted format? Because I might be dabbling in some other scripted content for this channel. I don't know. Maybe not Doctor Who related. Maybe Doctor Who related. So, definitely just leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Now, if I do scripted stuff, it won't be Doctor Who, but of course, The Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon moves swiftly on away from season 17, right into sort of the stories that take place in between. So, please join me next time when we start Big Finish's 5th series of 4th Doctor adventures, with a story with a surprise return villain. The first sort of season of audio dramas to feature Lala Ward as Romana, and the first release and one of the releases that actually got a vinyl release recently with Justin Richards' Wave of Destruction.